Okay, good morning, everyone, and I hope you all have a most enjoyable Heritage Day, and I hope the sun shines wherever you are. It's a bit overcast down here in Hermanus. But we'd like to introduce and welcome Toni Boniface this morning to talk to us. Toni regards himself as a tunnel engineer. He's actually a civil engineer, and he has a layman's interest in geology, he says. He came to South Africa in 1963 to work on the 83-kilometer Orange Fish Tunnel, which was a major component of the Orange River project. He stayed on afterwards, like I guess many British people who've come to this country, and worked for a company called Keith Steyn and Partners. While he was involved with them, he worked on tunnels throughout South Africa, so his expertise is really in tunnels, and also did 9 years on phase 1 of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. He then had a 4-year spell in the Far East before returning to South Africa in 2003 to work on Gautrain and various other projects, including the Ngula Pump Storage Scheme in the Eastern Free State. But anyway, he's also on the History and Heritage panel of the South African Institute of Engineers, and he's going to talk to us about our early geologists and forefathers of this fascinating business of ours today. So thanks, Toni. Thanks for making yourself available, and we really look forward to this presentation on Heritage Day.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Let me start by saying that I will refer to my two gentlemen that I refer to in the title of my talk there. I will refer to them as subject number 1 and subject number 2 until I reach those parts of the narrative where I feel it is time to reveal their identities. Much of my story has to do with fossils, which, as we all know, are traces of an organism buried naturally and preserved permanently by a process of mineralization. This guy, Xenophanes Colophon, puzzled over the existence of imprints of shells, fish, and other creatures in quarries, and even on mountaintops. There we are in the 6th century BC. But it was only in the late 18th and early 19th centuries that certain men with inquiring minds came to an understanding of exactly what they were and how they could be used to date the sedimentary rock formations in which they were found. In his book entitled The Genesis Enigma, Andrew Parker presents a hypothesis that the sequence of events as set out in the first chapter of Genesis in the Bible is in fact scientifically correct. Using his knowledge of paleontology, he takes the reader through the creation passage, quoting evolutionary paleontological evidence, confirming each and every stage. And in doing so, he endeavors to provide a bridge between science and religion. In the 18th and 19th centuries in England and other parts of Europe, there wasn't sufficient scientific knowledge for anyone to do a similar thing. Some tried, but following Galileo's run-in with the Pope, science and religion continued to be largely at loggerheads. And even today, it is evident that many feel that science and religion cannot be reconciled. But of course, others do. What was going on in Europe in the latter part of the 18th century, in the early part of the 19th century? Well, it was a period of immense change. The French Revolution had taken place. Bonaparte had become successfully emperor, was defeated at Waterloo and incarcerated firstly in Elba and finally on St. Helena, where he died in 1821. And the future Queen Victoria was still quite young. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and major changes were taking place not only in agricultural production, but in society as a whole. It was a period where applied science increasingly intruded into the realm of everyday life. The steam engine had been invented before the end of the 18th century, but it was not until 1825 that the Stockton to Darlington Railway was opened for commercial operation. But before the advent of railways, the building and use of canals for the transport of heavy goods was booming. Now, both of our subjects were born in the latter part of the 18th century and were actively following their geological activities in the first half of the 19th century. But before we get to either of them, we need to be introduced to one of the first notable geologists to appear on the scene in England, Sir Charles Lyell. In publishing his 3-volume Principles of Geology between 1830 and 1833, he popularized James Hutton's concept of uniformitarianism, which viewed the Earth as being continually shaped and reshaped by the same processes that had existed from the beginning of time. This book led many, including Charles Darwin, to understand the importance of geology. But my tale really begins a little earlier. On the 13th of October, 1807, a group of like-minded individuals met at the Freemasons' Tavern in Great Queen Street and formed the Geological Society, which initially met as a dining club. One of those present was a fellow of the Royal Society, none other than a polymathic socialite who'd been schooled at Eton, George Belus Greenhow. He was the son of a legal man and was a talented speaker. He was elected the Society's first president, and we'll come back to him a little later. Meanwhile, at the other end of the social spectrum, our subject number 1, a William Smith, was born in Oxfordshire, the son of a blacksmith. Although largely self-educated, Smith was highly intelligent, observant, and widely read. From an early age, he had showed an interest in fossils, which in those days were referred to by most people as figured stones. He found work in 1787 as an assistant surveyor in Gloucestershire and quickly became proficient in this profession. In those days, canals were an important and the only means of transporting large quantities of coal. He worked for several years as a surveyor on canal works for the Somersetshire Coal Canal Company. During this period, he also inspected a number of coal mines, where he recorded and mapped the coal and rock strata exposed by mining activities. This, combined with his observations of the strata exposed in the excavations for canals, proved crucial to the formation of his theories on stratigraphy. These theories were, of course, based on the observation that sedimentary rocks are produced by the steady, unrelenting, ongoing accumulation of sediments underwater, and that these then eventually solidify over long periods of time, with new, younger strata accumulating on the top of older strata. He then discovered that various strata would often reappear at different localities in the same relative positions, and that each particular stratum could be identified by the fossils it contained. Initially, he recorded his observations by means of vertical sections. But having seen a map showing the extent of the different types of soils and vegetation around the city of Bath, he realized that the same approach could be applied to his geological work. In other words, he could now produce maps showing the extent of the various geological formations as they outcropped on the surface of the ground. And this led to his developing a geological map of the area around Bath in 1799. Using the same techniques, he managed to produce his first rough geological sketch of England, Wales, and the southern part of Scotland in 1801. 14 years later, the completed map was published in London. This was the first geological map of a country. the first of its kind in the world. This is now the title at the top of the map. And then on the left, we have the 1815 map of his, and on the right, the modern day equivalent. But things were not well with his finances, which had been stretched to breaking point by the cost of publishing his geological maps and papers, together with his having embarked on a number of unsuccessful enterprises. In an attempt to stave off his debts, he sold his collection of fossils to the British museums for the handsome sum of £700. But this was not enough. And as a result, he was incarcerated in the King's Bench debtors' prison for 10 weeks. On being released, he returned home only to be met by a bailiff at the door, who denied him entry. His property had been seized. In the meantime, Greenhow, well known for his being a synthesizer of geological information, rather than being an original researcher who worked in the field and got his boots dirty, was at work producing his own map. He was not convinced by Smith's approach, which made use of fossils to identify strata in different localities, and preferred to rely on the similarity of the mineralogical properties of the rocks. Unlike Smith, he had all manner of social advantages, and furthermore, he was now once again president of the Geological Society. So, was it surprising that his plagiarized version of Smith's map took the limelight in 1820, while Smith, now an itinerant surveyor, was out in the field with his survey equipment, battling to recover from his financial woes? But, like Cinderella, Smith had a fairy godmother. Well, no, not a fairy godmother, but a worthy patron by the name of Sir John Johnston. Johnston recognized the value of Smith's pioneering work and took steps to ensure that Smith got the recognition he rightly deserved. It took a little time. In 1831, during Adam Sedgwick's presidency of the Geological Society, Smith was honoured with the Society's first award of the Wollaston Medal. It was on this occasion that Sedgwick referred to Smith as the father of English geology. Further honours followed, including the award of an honorary doctorate of laws from Trinity College in Dublin. But now we must have a complete change of scene and employ our antique magic carpet to bring ourselves back to our part of the Southern Hemisphere. The British had taken over Cape Town in 1795, but then lost it in 1803, before finally taking it over for a second time in 1806. Grahamstown was the second most important town in the Cape at the time. It had been founded in 1812, when the frontier wars had begun in 1779 and would continue sporadically until 1818. There in Grahamstown, we meet another three extraordinary polymathic, persistent and practical Victorian gentlemen. And in future, I'll refer to such people as triple PVGs. And here in Grahamstown, we have three such gentlemen. All of them had an interest in and collected Karoo fossils in the surrounding area and began to grips with the local geology. And the first of these was a Dr. Lawrence Jameson, who was a staff surgeon at the Cape. Jameson was resident in Grahamstown from about 1838 and is credited with finding a number of notable fossils. This led to his writing an account of the local geology, which he submitted to the local weekly newspaper, the Grahamstown Journal. His long article headed Geology of South Africa was serialized over 3 issues, with the first installment being published on the 3rd of January 1839. The editor introduced the article by saying, "The following interesting remarks on the geology of this part of the colony have been forwarded to us by Dr. L. Jameson for insertion in this journal. We have great pleasure in finding room for them, and we conceive that the public is greatly indebted to Dr. Jameson for this attempt to break through the dull monotony of mere political disquisition." It generated reaction from the local community and became a geology versus theology debate, which continued for 6 weeks or so. Jameson maintained that the two could be reconciled, but unlike Parker, who tackled the same subject more than a century later, he could not offer any substantive evidence to support his position. Our second Grahamstown at triple PVG was Dr. William Guyborne Atherstone, who showed an early interest in geology, medical science, and natural history. He was a founder member of both the Scientific and Literary Society, which led to the establishment of the Albany Museum, the South African Geological Association, and eventually the Geological Society of South Africa in 1895. Atherstone is perhaps known best for being the person who identified the stone that was in fact the first diamond found in South Africa, and maybe not so well known for the fact of having located the diamondiferous outcrop in the field that was subsequently referred to as Colesberg Kopje, which of course became De Beers' famous big hole at Kimberley. Atherstone's association with the third triple PVG brings us to our subject number 2, none other than Andrew Hedges Bain. Atherstone's acquaintance with Bain led Atherstone becoming interested in geology and paleontology. A Scot by birth, Bain was at various times in his life an explorer, saddle maker, soldier, farmer, geologist, paleontologist, writer, and artist. And of course, he became most well known as a heroic builder of roads and mountain passes. And being a tunneler, I can't resist adding that he also built at least one tunnel. His impressive and lasting legacy in road building has, however, overshadowed his perhaps even more significant achievement in being the first to gain an understanding of the geology of the Cape. How did this come about? During 1837, he was in charge of the construction of what was called the Queen's Road between Grahamstown and Fort Beaufort. He became fascinated by the geological outcrops that he encountered along the route, particularly in the Eka Pass, which traverses some of the lower formations in the Karoo sequence. It was at this time that Captain Campbell, the civil commissioner in Grahamstown, lent Bain a copy of Lyell's book, Principles of Geology, which we referred to earlier on. And in passing, we note that Lyell himself was another triple PVG, having been trained as a lawyer and having been elected a fellow of the Royal Society at the tender age of 33. Anyway, let's get back to Bain. Bain avidly consumed the contents of the book and became an enthusiastic geologist, subsequently remarking that he regretted not having made himself familiar with the subject many years previously. He started collecting fossils in his leisure time. His first major discovery was that of a reptile skull with 2 tusk-like teeth, which he called a bidental, and which was subsequently and formally given the name Dicynodon bainii. His most important find, however, was a group of large bones in a skull with a large jaw, with 56 serrated teeth, and he referred to it initially as the Blinkwater monster. It was subsequently identified by Owen as Parasaurus ceridens, the earliest known vertebrate to give up crawling and take to walking. Bain's fossil collection grew and grew, and, feeling that it was of some considerable interest and significance, offered it to a certain institute in Grahamstown. To his chagrin, his offer was summarily rejected. Not to be put off, Bain then wrote to the Foreign Secretary of the Geological Society in London in April 1844. He described his fossil collection and sent with it a geological sketch map of the southeast part of the Cape. This created great interest, and Mr. Henry Warburton, the then president of the Society, drew up a paper based on Bain's letter, which was read to the fellows of the Society. Following this, Bain labelled, packed and shipped most of his fossil collection to the Geological Society in London. In 1845, Bain had completed his work on the military roads in the Eastern Cape, and as the Royal Engineers were reorganised, he was dismissed from the army with a bare note of thanks for his services. He was, however, offered and accepted the post of Inspector of Roads of the Western Cape. His ongoing road building work gave him further opportunities to follow up on his geological interests, and this led him to send another collection of fossils, a geological map of the Cape Colony, and a long detailed memoir to the London Society in 1851. So here is the map. It's quite large. It's 1350 millimeters by 796. And that is the title. And here we have a portion of the map of the Western Cape going through to Cape Agulhas, and of course the corresponding map from the Council of Geoscience in 1997. Bain had prepared his map, the first geological map of the country, all on his own, as Smith had done in England before him. As the Geological Society of London acknowledged, it had been the triumphant results of the single-handed labours and unaided research of one who, by his own perseverance and talent alone, had not only worked out so grand a geological problem, but has trained and wholly educated himself for the task. The map and memoir was subsequently published, and as a consequence, it was recommended that Bain be appointed Geological Surveyor of the Cape of Good Hope. But this was not to be. Instead, he and his son went on with road building work, resulting in the construction of a significant number of mountain passes in the Cape. Nonetheless, he has become quite rightly regarded by present-day geologists as the father of South African geology. And here we have the cover of the centenary publication of the Geological Society of South Africa, with the portraits of 6 prominent pioneering geologists superimposed on a copy of Bain's original map. And that copy of the map was presented by the president of the Geological Society in London on the occasion of the centenary. And of course, here we see Alex de Toy, Hans Marensky, Sidney Horton, Andrew Hedges Bain, David Draper, and Hugh Exton. And what has all this got to do with a mansion in Piccadilly, in London's West End, home to a number of institutions and organisations, including the Geological Society of London? Well, in the prologue to his intriguing account of William Smith's topsy-turvy life, The Map That Changed the World, Simon Winchester, who was himself a trained geologist, writes, "Above one of the many grand marble staircases within the eastern wing of Burlington House, the great Palladian-styled mansion on the north side of London's Piccadilly, hangs a pair of huge sky blue velvet curtains. Although many may wonder in passing, really does anyone of the scores of people who climb and descend the stairs inquires to what lies behind the drapes. A blocked off window, perhaps, a painting too grotesque to show, a rare continental tapestry faded by sunlight. Once in a while, someone curious and bold will demand a look, whereupon the functionary will emerge from behind a door marked private, and with practiced hand gently tug down the twisted and tasseled silk ropes to reveal the original of William Smith's 1815 hand-drawn and coloured geological map of England and Wales, the work of a single man. It is huge, some 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. Winchester then closes the prologue by mentioning, as an aside, that only a short distance away on an adjoining staircase and behind another pair of curtains, there's another somewhat similar but slightly smaller map. This is the plagiarized version of Smith's work, which had been produced 4 years later by his aristocratic nemesis, George Bellis Greenhow. And there they are, together, with the short staircase between the two of them. And now, on the last page, as it were, of my tale, we bring in Bain. The results of Bain's painstaking efforts may also be found and seen in this very same Palladian Mansion. I've been assured by my contact at the Geological Society in London that if you make arrangements prior to making a visit, they will bring it out of their archives and show you the original of Andrew Geddes Bain's geological map of South Africa. It had been painstakingly prepared in his spare time while building the mountain pass between Wellington and Ceres that bears his name. His map is somewhat smaller than those of Smith and Greenhow, being just over 4 foot long and 2.5 feet wide, in spite of the fact that it covers a much greater area of the Earth's surface. Well, I now have brought you to the end of my tale, but I have a little bit of a postscript. In the course of researching for subject material for this talk, I came across Alan Cohen's paper, Mr. Bain and Dr. Atherstone, South Africa's Pioneer Fossil Hunters, which was published in the Earth Sciences History in the year 2000. No doubt the contents of this paper are known to our OG diamond specialists. I certainly found it interesting reading. The latter part of the paper provides an interesting account of how Atherstone not only correctly identified the first diamond discovered in South Africa, but also how he was responsible for pointing out in the field a promising diamondiferous copy that was named Colesberg copy that I referred to earlier. And that brings me to the end of my talk, and I thank you. And these are some references if anybody wants to follow them up. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Tony. That was wonderful. Are you a historian apart from an engineer and a tunnel builder as well?
No, I'm just interested in historical things. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm a member of our History and Heritage panel on the institution of our South African Institution of Civil Engineering. And currently we're working on a fascinating project, which is that Orange River project will have been in use, successful use, for 50 years or so in the next year or two. So we are a team of us are trying to put together material to publish a book to commemorate the occasion.
Fantastic. Okay, does everyone want to unmute? Can you unmute them all, Henny?
I can only ask them. I've done so they can all talk now. So.
Okay. Well, let's have some fascinating discussion. There's John Rogers on the call.
John Truswell has a question.
I wanted to make two comments. one Robin Richards, who was a member of this group and sadly died last year, was a descendant of Bain, and he held one of three, he called them copies, but presumably they were in some way original, of Bain's 1845 map. And the second comment I'd like to make, I spent a long time ago when I was at Wits, I spent some months in the UK trying to get an understanding of how the stratigraphic column had developed, and one couldn't help but be an admirer of William Smith. But the one outcrop that struck me more than any other in wandering around in the UK was James Hutton's unconformity, which he had found inland in southeastern Scotland, but he figured that it would be exposed on the coast. And he took, in a small boat with some eminent fellow scientists, he discovered Sycamore Point. And at the unconformity there, below it is a Ordovician greywacke, vertical, and above it is the old red sandstone, which is Devonian. And in the passage from the biblical concept of the creation being about 5,000 years ago to absolute ages which emerged in the middle of this century, middle of the last century, his realization that those sediments had to be laid down, a massive force must have been involved in their standing vertical and then being planed off and then had further sedimentation on top. He realized the enormity of geological time. And Lyell, who we just heard more about, Lyell relied a great deal on Hutton's earlier work and obviously recognized it. It had not, it had little attention until Lyell made it a major point in his book.
Yeah, what wonderful stuff. Robin Richards, as you say, was a member of the community and a descendant. I mean, he would have loved to have been part of this discussion. Maybe we should have got his wife to attend, but we'll make sure that she gets the video clip as well.
Yeah, John, it's interesting, a very interesting talk indeed. Thank you very much. It's interesting if you look at James Kitchen, the famous fossil man from Wits University, who also is passed on now, but he was also a son of a road builder, and father collected many fossils at the time, and that's how James Kitchen got interested in fossils, and they were building roads around Graafrenet in that part of the world.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating how Grahamstown played a role, and I guess that was one of the very early and very successful geology departments as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's interesting to listen to those names, and a lot of those names are the names of reses when I was at university there. And, you know, you always wondered, Athelstan was the very big girls' residence, and you always wondered who Mr. Athelstan was, and only found out years later.
Right. More discussion. You can either unmute yourselves, and we want to see your faces as well, or you can press your space bar and have a chat.
Can I say something, John?
Please, Leslie.
Leslie here. Hi. I want to say thank you very, very much for a wonderful talk. It really brings back and emphasizes the hard work that people have done to put just a line on a map, to the miles and miles that people have walked to just put a spot on a map that makes sense and then stands the test of time. I'm always in awe of that effort and that understanding. As you know, I've been involved in a bit of map making myself, and I've always felt that the intellectual sort of, how can I say, the intellectual effort is underappreciated for that sort of information. A couple of things. I know who would have loved to have been here today would have been Jerry Levine, Satterson, and Jerry Levine, who's been out, was an archivist and was also passionate about the history of geology in South Africa. Another aside, there's another person who made a geological map, and that is Thomas Baines. He did the gold map of Rhodesia and the early days, I think in 1860s, on his trip. And a copy of that map is in Durban. Well, not a copy, the original of that map is in Durban at the Killie Campbell archives in Marriott Road. And I've seen it, but it's in a very fragile state. It's not, they wouldn't even let me open it, but they gave me a CD scan of the whole map, and I have a copy of that here at home. But thank you so much, Tony, for a wonderful talk, all that wonderful research and effort. And it just makes you appreciate what these early people did with the limited technology that they had, not the GPS efforts and satellites and digital mapping that we do today. Thank you.
And the power of observations as well, because when you go back to those localities, I think as John highlighted, you can see exactly what they saw. I'm always in awe of Du Toit's writings, and when you go to a locality, you see exactly what you've seen in the book. It's just amazing.
Well, the power of description was very rigorous. They had a discipline, and you can read old reports and you can imagine what they were looking at. It's quite amazing. I don't know that that students have that same discipline today, because everything is photographed and done in code. But I think going back to some of those old memoirs and reports and bulletins, you understand the absolute meticulous power of the description.
Okay, fantastic. More questions, please. Discussion.
Now, if you just look at the fact that, as Toni and I discussed, how many different disciplines, how many, that these people actually attained in their lifetime, and so wide apart from each other, and they were good at each and every one of those things.
Yeah. What I'm also seeing, Eni, is that you engineers were actually very useful out there, huh? It wasn't only geologists.
Yeah. No, I was, when we were working on hydro stations and so on, my wife was to say to me, why can't we, when are we going to meet a civil engineer? We're all out in a stick here, so when are we going to do some civil engineering? And then until we got to the big cities.
You mean as in civil or?
In civil society type of, not that they were rude guys, but it was always.
Okay.
And I had the fortune to work on 3 different projects with Toni. So thank you, Toni, for that very, very interesting talk.
Someone was going to make a question there.
Just want to comment. Last year, I went to the William Smith renovated Rotunda Museum in Scarborough.
Could you just tell us who you are, number 513?
My name is John Rogers.
Oh, really?
Come in a bit late. I went to the William Smith Rotunda Museum last year, which was renovated specially for me. And then I went to Sycamore Point with a local guide who guided one of my students there before me. It's a very, very satisfying destination. Very well interpreted.
Okay. And whereabouts exactly are they, John?
Okay, Scarborough is on the east coast of England. And then Sycamore Point is on the southeast coast of Scotland in Berwickshire. And I went there mainly by train to Berwick on Tweed Station.
Okay, lovely. Right, more questions, or is everyone warming up their briars or mid-morning tea and cake?
I mean, just as a final comment, and I hate to sound like an old codger, But you know,
careful now, Adrian.
You can't get exploration geologists to go into the field these days unless they come home every weekend. They've got Wi-Fi with them. They're on Facebook, and they have the laptop and everything else set up. And I just look back at these guys in the 18th and 19th centuries and think, wow, they were supermen. I mean, they're just absolutely amazing. I can't get my mind around that kind of person. It's just, what happened to them? What are they doing now? But what happened to their replacements? God, it's just amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I have one more comment? Can I just have one more comment?
Yeah, go for it, John.
I've had an old book by Archibald Geekie called The Founders of Geology for years and years, but I actually read it this year, and I'm now quite keen to compare notes with Tony.
Okay. Well, I've also got the two copies of Lyell's Elements of Geology. So if anyone wants to do some reading of that too, and again, they're fascinating. Just looking at their diagrams and artwork, it's just amazing stuff. And their English language. That's probably why you can understand what they're writing. Okay. Anyone
Are you
else?
in touch with each other, Tony and John?
Yeah, we'll make a plan, Tony, to get where. And question, Tony, where did you get all those lovely diagrams? Is that through your research?
Well, which particular ones are you referring to?
Some of the early stuff, you know, some of those historical pictures.
Oh, that's all internet.
Okay, fascinating. What's on the internet?
Oh, indeed.
Okay.
For the most part.
Yeah. And it goes back to doing good, solid research. But, okay, everyone, thanks for your attendance. And thanks, Tony. That was really wonderful stuff. It sort of sparks a few ideas and thoughts and makes me want to get out into the field again.
Okay, guys, these talks are all available on the YouTube, on the Geological Society's platform. There is a playlist that is specifically for us guys here. So if you're interested in any of the previous talks, drop us a line and we can give you the link to that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
John.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.